I don't think people will see us.
Way to warn me.
Olivia, do you see us?
Sonia, can you move your markers from right there and move the racial?
Oh, you can see us. Sorry about that. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
All right, you good?
Thank you, ma'am.
One last thing, can you fix this chair? These two chairs right here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, you can still hear me?
Indeed, I can.
Awesome. I just refreshed because it was still a little glitchy. Seems better now.
We'll be starting in a couple of moments, folks. So on behalf of Speak for the Trees, I wanted to invite everyone today to our presentation, our dialogue around the importance of building community and continuing to do the work we do, especially in these challenging times that we're facing, not only as a city, as a state, as a country, but as a world, as humanity. I wanted to thank all of you for joining us today. I wanted to especially thank the law firm of Anderson Krieger for supporting us in running this event. And I want to welcome our co-host and newest board member, Atyia Martin, to the team. She and I will be leading the conversation and the discussion today. Before we begin, though, always like to start events with a land acknowledgement. This is one I borrowed from an organization that I deeply admire called the Upstander Project. Land acknowledgement is acknowledgement of the people and the history that existed before European colonialists came to New England. So we acknowledge the sacred land where we work, where we live, plant trees, teach, learn, and build community, which has been a site of human activity for 13,000 years. This land is the territory of the Massachusetts and their neighbors, the Wampanoag and the Nipmuc people, who have stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. Today, Boston remains home to thousands of indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work here. We extend our respect to the citizens of these nations who live here today, and their ancestors who have lived here for over 500 generations, and to all indigenous people. We also affirm that this acknowledgement is in many ways insufficient. It does not undo the harm that has been done and continues to be perpetuated now against indigenous people, their land, and their water. And I think remembering the ways in which many of these indigenous people related to community and especially to nature reaffirms the work that we do here at Speak for the Trees and the work that we're all collectively doing. So today we're gathered to continue a conversation about how we can build community and build a stronger city for the future. We recognize the challenges that we face today, but we are heartened by the compassion, support that we've seen throughout our communities. We've seen neighbors provide each other, that we've seen our leaders provide us. And I'm heartened by all the outreach I've seen virtually and door to door. At Speak for the Trees, we think talking about trees and talking about public health is an important conversation always. And we think it's also the right conversation to have now as we think about our future and what the future holds. Trees, especially during this time of year, also serve as a reminder. If you go outside, take a moment to look at the tree around your house, see how it's responding to the change of season. They help give us a sense of place. They help us to give us a sense of hope. And they remain rooted, providing us with respite, growth, and a reminder of what the future can hold. So today I'm really pleased to welcome Atyia and to welcome you all for a conversation. Atyia Martin joined our board a couple of months ago. Atyia was the Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Boston, where she worked on developing a really powerful and impactful report on racial equity and resilience. And I welcome her here today. And we're going to have a conversation about our work.
So thank you, David. It's a pleasure. I'm interested in, you kind of talked about the value of trees, generally speaking, to the community, to us as individuals, but I'm curious for you personally, what has made you so interested in trees? Where does that passion come from that drives you into this work?
Yeah, thank you. I used to be a high school science teacher, and my work there was really about thinking, how do kids relate to the world around them? What's the way that we can better engage them in thinking about issues of equity, thinking about the environment, thinking about being able to act? And as I was working with these youth, I just realized that the classroom felt really constrained. So I started imagining what a way to relate to help people come together around what I see as two of our greatest challenges of our time. And in my mind, those challenges are the great inequity that we face in our country, and thinking about that inequity in terms of really broadly, in terms of environmental equity, but also the sense of opportunity and engagement in our democracy. And the second challenge, I think, is climate change, and how are we going to deal with the issues that we face as a country and as a city around climate change. And trees drew me in as a metaphor, a way to connect people to each other, to build neighborhood, to build communityhood, and really to think about how do we build a future for us? How do we find ways for people to connect to each other, to connect to their communities, and to take care of each other in a way that's democratic at its core?
So thank you for that. And I think for me, your passion and dedication to the work is what drew me in as a board member. I think we met, what is it, a year and a half ago now,
Sounds right.
at an event, and you asked me to be on your board, and I said, I can't right now. I have too much on my plate, and I said, come see me in the fall. And that's exactly what you did. You followed up, and it's really been a pleasure to see how the work comes together. And what I mean by that is how the power of trees in doing all of the things that you described, and some more that I'll talk about in a second, but also the power of community and community voice and community decision making, which is one of the reasons why I decided to be a part of Speak for the Trees, because there's something really powerful about communities being able to make decisions about what's happening in their own space, in their own communities. And for those who have the space to be able to take one of the trees that come from a tree giveaway, or participate in a urban forest cleanup, or all of the different opportunities that Speak for the Trees offers for members, for volunteers, and people who just generally care about trees and the environment. And so for me, that has really been powerful. And I think what we oftentimes underestimate is the power of connection between people and nature, right? Especially in times like these. You know, we're in a period with COVID-19 or coronavirus where lots of us are confined to space in a way that feels very anxiety making. And so trees, we're allowed to go outside, right? We're just not allowed to congregate, or we shouldn't be congregating. And so trees provide a sense of connection to a bigger picture, to something bigger than ourselves. But in part of that is the sense of awe, right? When you start to really pay attention, when you're really present and you're mindful about what's in front of you when you're looking at a tree, it can create a sense of awe, which is one of the most important emotions, you know, according to the nerds in positive psychology, one of the 7 important emotions that we as humans need to experience in order to stay healthy mentally, spiritually, which is connected to our physical health. And so that power, I think, is really important for us to be explicit about, so that even as we're in this very difficult, weird, surreal moment in time, that we also see the opportunities that are right in front of us to help us have those kinds of experiences. So thank you for having me as part of the board, and thank you for hosting this conversation. So that said, The other thing I wanted to just mention to folks, because you talked a lot about how to the power of trees, the power of their impact on the environment, on all of these pieces. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about the specific work that Speak for the Trees does.
Yeah, gladly. So thank you, Atyia, and I think you have seen firsthand the work we do even before you were a board member. It was a pleasure to get to know your family and invite you to so many events and see you really get your hands dirty. So we do a couple of things, and we're learning as we go. I want to be mindful of the fact that while this some ways feels like it's new work, at the same time, Boston has had efforts in the past 10, 15 years that have come and gone to build community around urban forestry. And there continue to be those efforts at the neighborhood level. And really thrilled to see communities come together. I've seen great work in Roslindale. I've seen wonderful work in East Boston through a group called NOAA. And we're learning from those communities. And what's great about Boston is that there's so much energy around green space. And we have one of the best, if not the best, park systems in the country. So we have beautiful trees. The question is, how do we meet people in places that might not have those immediate benefits of trees or receive those benefits, whether they be, like you talked about, Atyia, that sense of awe, but we also think of them as the what you might call ecosystem benefits of trees. So those benefits like cleaner air or cooler air, just healthier living. So what we think about and what we're intentional around is trying to find ways to bring trees to people. Oftentimes when we think of trees, we think about going out and meeting trees where they live. But how do we change that narrative and really make a tree an opportunity for someone to connect to their neighborhood, to connect to their neighbors, to connect to their street, to connect to their friends and children? So we're really intentional about getting to know those communities where we think trees can benefit residents the most. So we think broadly in terms of environmental justice and what that means, and we also look at data around tree canopy coverage in the city. And we target communities and we talk to people where we want to make a difference. Boston is a very diverse city with people with very different backgrounds and very different lived experiences, and trees mean different things to different people. So we do our work in ways that allows people to come in, and that was a long way of saying allows people to come in very different places in very different ways. One thing we do is we teach people how to inventory trees, and you have a slide here where we have taken, we've worked with a group of youth through the city to teach 9 Boston youth on how to inventory street trees. And we created a map of about 5,000 or 6,000 street trees so far in the city and about over 1,000 planting sites where new trees can go. We do this both with youth through our Teen Urban Tree Corps program. So we have a picture here with Commissioner Woods. And we also have engaged people like Michelle Wu in learning about our work. These youth come from all over the city. We're really intentional in trying to find youth who can represent different neighborhoods and different backgrounds that represent the city of Boston. We work with other youth. So we've worked a lot with kids through Boys and Girls Clubs over the summer. And we've also engaged our youth in learning from and getting to know people in the community and through the sponsorship we've had. So for example, here's a picture of one of our youth working this summer with some employees over at John Hancock, and they've been wonderful, wonderful supporters of our work at the Hancock Natural Resource Group. Another part of that work is having youth have a voice around what the work that they do, what it means and why it's important. So that's one component of our work, is our youth engagement. The other component of our work, and I have a short video here that I'll share with you, is doing community tree plantings. And these plantings really come from the community, and they're ways for us to think about and learn from people around what their needs are and what their aspirations are. So I'll share that and then talk through that a little more. And hopefully this will work.
We're in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. This is a very diverse neighborhood. There are people from all over the world.
This part of Dorchester has empty, blighted lots. Now, we know that if we turn places that are ugly into beautiful spaces, we create healthier communities.
Really, all throughout the city and every neighborhood of Boston are neighbors coming together to say we want to do something to make food more accessible, to bring nature back into our neighborhood. That's where these food forest gardens have really gotten their energy, is from the local people.
I'm just so incredibly excited to be collaborating with such an amazing team. I cannot wait to see the end result.
We're here today to really transform this lot into a green space.
This space will serve as a source of access to food, shifting culture, getting people to think more of healthy, open green space, and getting people to even come and plant here.
We're unloading some awesome fruit trees here.
Trees represent rootedness. So when you plant a tree, it claims that space for the community.
Gardens heal. It gives you a chance to see something from nothing to its fruition, and this neighborhood needs this revitalization.
This garden not only signal transformation, but I think hope for the communities. And so I think this is going to completely transform this corridor of the district.
I'm just really happy that the community is coming alive again, despite all the negative things that are happening. If we do more of these things, I think that will translate to healing.
This is exactly what we've been trying to do and create. Thank you so much again.
Trees represent hope. So I want to thank all our partners who had the vision here to build a really sustainable urban forest. Thank you so much.
So I'm not sure if there's a lag, if you can hear me again. Sorry, this technology is not perfect. We're still learning.
No worries, I can hear you just fine. So that video you showed. Am I back on? You're back on. Can you hear me? So we can hear you, but you can't hear me.
All right. So that was an example of some of the work we've been able to do. And then the final thing we do, other than our teen program, is, and actually two more things we do. One of them is we work to give away trees to residents. And this is a program that we've seen happen in cities across the country. And we're learning a lot from two partnerships that we've developed. One of them you'll hear about later today in the show with a wonderful organization called American Forests, based out of DC, the oldest environmental organization in the country. And the other one, we partner closely with Arbor Day, learning from their network of other similar organizations. And we find organizations like Speak for the Trees Boston in pretty much every major city in this country, and some of them are 40 years old. Like in LA, there's a wonderful organization called Tree People. So we take this model of things like tree giveaways, and we're creating opportunities here to learn from these organizations and see how they do things. So last year, we were able to give away over 100 trees to residents. We use that same little area you saw in Dorchester as sort of our anchor community, and we advertised widely to residents. We learned from many of the residents that they actually wanted fruit trees. It was an interesting learning opportunity for us to see that people saw trees as a way to build wealth. And one way that especially immigrant communities from the Caribbean and from Vietnam, which are a lot in this area of Dorchester, see wealth as this opportunity to provide for their families, and trees were seen as one way of providing. So we gave away over 100 trees. We taught people how to plant trees. People came with shopping carts to take trees home. People took taxis home with trees sticking out the side. They're beautiful trees, and we see this as a really important way to complement the wonderful work that the city does in street trees. The biggest area we have available, or one of the biggest areas, I should say, we have available to increase our urban forests in Boston is on private residential land. And we continue to do this work, and this is a picture of, I think, the event you were at, Atyia, in Sharon Woods in Dorchester, in Hyde Park, where we planted trees with coordination with Boston Parks and Rec in one of their urban wilds. So I'll, stop there. There are a couple more photos here, but that's the sort of the scope of our work, and we also work with adult volunteers and several other projects in providing all sorts of ways for people to get into our work.
Thank you for that. Can you hear me now? David?
I don't know if I can hear you, Atyia.
Okay. So I'm going to assume that the audience can hear me. And one of the things that we talked about, and but you still cannot.
No, I can't hear Atyia. Sorry, guys. Give me a sec here.
All right, what about now? And now David is frozen. So one of the things that the video David brought up was this idea of equity. And some people are curious, based on the pre-survey results, or pre-webinar results, that about urban communities. And so my focus is on racial equity. And one of the questions explicitly asked about confronting race and class disparities. And so I want to sit on that for a moment, because I know sometimes in our love of trees, sometimes we flip the understanding of those benefits in its relationship with equity. And so there's some people who frame it as, when you have more trees, that, it reduces crime and it does all of these things, right? And so that's one part of it, right? And then the other part is there's always more to an equation than one piece. And in many communities, what we've done is we've said that we made policy decisions in communities, in government, in the private sector, where we said that certain communities don't deserve to have access to trees, right? You just need the bare minimum to meet your basic needs, and your quality of life doesn't matter in this context. And no one ever says that explicitly. But when people are thinking about what it means to partner with communities, both communities that are working poor and communities that are communities of color, and somewhere there's an intersection of the two, you see this pattern of less access to green space. There's still green space, but there's less access to it, comparatively speaking, because of those decisions. And what I really appreciate about Speak for the Trees is this idea of no one has a monopoly on quality of life, on a right to quality of life, and that all of us deserve that access. And it's not up to anyone else to decide for communities what they want or need, but that communities are part of a decision-making process to bring Speak for the Trees into their community, as well as to decide what it is that they need. And the more that we can share power, the more we can have shared decision-making processes where communities can decide things for themselves, which also requires a building of knowledge and a building of experiences that comes with partnering with Speak for the Trees. I think that is an important part of a larger approach to how do we make sure that we're addressing equity issues in communities of color and poor communities and lots of communities who are struggling because we left them out. We intentionally or early on and then later unintentionally forgot about them. And so I just want to explicitly call that out, as well as that relationship to public health. So some of the questions that we received in that pre-webinar survey also asked about kind of what is the public health relationship. So early on, I mentioned some of the broad stroke pieces, but I think an important concept for people to understand that comes from the public health world is social determinants of health. And this idea that there are many layers to our experiences that impact the outcome, our experiences with health and the outcomes when it comes to health. And that's everything from kind of socioeconomic issues as well as access issues. And it includes race, gender, class, all of those pieces, with race being one of the biggest social determinants of health in this country and internationally. So I wanted to connect those dots, which also connect to the previous comment I made. Can you hear me now? It seems like you were nodding your head.
I can. Yeah, I was. Because I have a lot to add to that.
Yes, well, get in there, because the other buckets of questions are specifically about kind of the urban forest and some of the program goals, or programs and goals, which you covered already.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Atyia. So we're really mindful of the history of the city, and as someone who hasn't lived extensively in Boston, or not, my roots aren't as deep as some of the communities where we work. The history of Boston is one of inequity, and there's been some interesting studies that actually can trace lots of this inequity, at least to the history of redlining in the 1930s, and looking at how communities today that were low on the rank of redlining, which have ended up being communities of color, where a lot of Black and brown people were encouraged to buy homes, are actually those communities where the tree canopy coverage is the smallest. And that is a painful history, and that is a history that I think we're still trying to come to terms with. And it's a history that's literally rooted in our concrete today. So you walk down some of these streets and you see tree barren streets, what I call tree deserts. Now, what's interesting about Boston is some of those tree deserts are right next door to some of the most beautiful public spaces we have, like Franklin Park or the Emerald Necklace. And the inequity sometimes gets masked a little bit when we look at these beautiful big parks by the trees that are or not in front of people's homes, and those trees that provide direct benefits. So we think of trees as doing lots of really important things. You mentioned crime, reducing crime in neighborhoods. We also think of them as reducing rates of asthma by filtering particulate matter. We also think of them as reducing cardiac disease and improving or reducing energy bills in the summer and the winter by providing shade or providing wind blocks. So there are these direct health benefits that also end up being economic benefits. And we've worked closely with American forests in thinking about this idea through the lens of what is called tree equity. And tree equity is like any other type of equity, where we can, not any other type of equity, but like lots of types of equity. You can think about the inequity that we face, and how do we think about who gets these benefits and who doesn't. So I think what's important about our work is it has to be both local in that it has to engage people where they live, because those trees are local things, but it also has to be comprehensive in thinking about the entire forest. And that's where that partnership with other organizations, other community groups, with the city, with American Forest, with Arbor Day is really important, is how do we come together around this in a way that's mindful of the direct local benefits, but also the larger citywide benefits. And I would also argue this sense, when you talk about awe, the sense of connecting the tree to what is really an international crisis around climate change, right? I mean, this one tree opens up an opportunity in a really authentic, meaningful way that's literally rooted in the street or in your yard, about talking about climate change in a way that impacts your life. So it's not some far away problem. It's a problem that's here and now that allows people to connect to it in a way that's important to them, that they connect to.
Thank you for that. And for the audience, so David mentioned redlining, and I want to make sure that you have the context you need. I'm not going to get into the details now, but what I will recommend is that you check out the website designingthewe.com. We'll put that in the chat here shortly. Designingthewe.com. They have an initiative called Undesign the Red Line, which is a national initiative where they go into different cities, including Boston. They hosted something in Boston too, where they work with communities to find the redlining maps for their particular city, and then look at they picked two neighborhoods, one that was within the red line, one that was outside of the red line, and compare what's happening in those communities, what was happening then and what was happening now, or what is happening now rather. And so they've done this all across the country, and you can see on the map what that work looks like, and the work that community organizations that partner with them have done to kind of create a whole historical context and narrative and connecting it to present day realities and why we see communities looking the way they do. So all of that said, we have the other piece that we have in terms of questions that people have asked is what are the ways that we as individuals can take action, can support this kind of work? What are the things that we want people or that we need people to be doing in general, and then especially in the context of this COVID-19 situation?
Yeah, I mean, this COVID-19 situation has really, I think, made a lot of us, especially in the nonprofit world who work in communities, to rethink our work. I'll tell you what we were thinking before and where we're going now. And this is, I think, a really opportune time to have a larger discussion later today. But we've looked at what other cities do in terms of engagement and having, I think our biggest asset in Boston is our social capital, is the people who live in this city. And I've looked at what other nonprofits do, and yes, they do tree plantings. Yes, they do tree education in schools. But one of the things that they do that's really impactful and really helpful for the city is they do things like watering trees. So teaching people how much to water a tree. They teach people how to prune trees. They teach people how to do outreach and door knocking around requesting trees. So all these things that really, I think, allow us to learn from other cities. How do you build a network? How do you build an advocacy group that can engage people? Again, it's all about the community work. It's all about what's the desire, what's the hope, and what's the future that these communities want. And then how do we work with the city to make sure that we're not interfering with their efforts, that we're actually supplementing their work. So the work that we've done already, the mapping we've done using an app called Open Tree Map with the teens that you'll meet in a couple of minutes and with some adult volunteers, is building a base for that. Because once we have a map of street trees, we can start encouraging people to care for trees and actually logging information that allow us to then track which tree has been watered this week. We're in the middle of a heat wave. We're in the middle of a drought. And then we can actually then go and ask people in the neighborhood to water those trees, which relieve some of the burden from the city. We're going to teach people how to request trees. So that's a type of work we're hoping to continue to do. What do we do now with COVID-19, I think, is a real challenge. And I hope that we can continue to encourage people to, when things settle down a little bit, to actually go out and look at trees and collect data on trees. As long as you're staying away from, right now, you have the proper social distancing, going up to a tree and measuring it seems like a perfectly safe thing to do. Logging that information, doing outreach somehow and taking pictures and posting them on Instagram or posting them on other social media to celebrate the trees or to remark on how they're growing and how they're, still vibrant during this time. I think to celebrate that is something that we can be doing right now. I think we could all sort of appreciate the continuity of life. And that our trees are still providing us so much, and we need to celebrate that.
So I'm going to challenge you, because I know as someone who's running a nonprofit that it's hard to ask for what you need specifically. And so I am going to make you do that with love. And so and so from a Speak for the Trees perspective, what do you need right now? How can people be helpful, and how can they participate in the work that you're doing now in terms of COVID-19 and what you envision for the future?
Yeah, so I mean, there's, for the low-hanging fruit, we're a scrappy nonprofit, and we really rely on donations from all people who in Boston and actually nationally who care about trees and care about the importance of this issue. And we are so grateful for the support we've seen already. And we continue to, especially in these trying times, need that money to get us through the next couple of months as we look ahead to hopefully our summer program, to be able to hire more staff, to work with the teens in our Teen Urban Tree Corps program, to be able to meet people where they're at, to continue to provide trees. So that's one thing that, I really appreciate and hope that, just $10, $20, $100 gets a tree to a resident, continues to allow us to engage. The other thing is, we're always looking for community partners, for people to help us in doing the outreach, in continuing to help us find the right people who want a tree or who want to learn how to inventory trees. So spread the word. Maybe you work at a company that has an eco team that wants to learn how to inventory trees as part of our branching out program. We've put in some resources on our window today where you can actually download a PDF and share it with your team. Maybe you're a community member or lead at a local organization, and you want to help us do outreach and get people trees to plant in their yard. We welcome that too. So we're continuing to try to figure out creative ways to get trees out to people. We have hopefully 150 coming in sometime in the next month or two. Trying to think, what will that look like? Are we going to have a community event? And if we can't, then what type of event do we host? Do we host a tree drop-off? Do we host a tree drive-through? Or do we wait till the fall? And I think we need to have a conversation around that. And I hope this is just the beginning of that conversation about thinking, what are people comfortable with? What are the public health implications of this COVID-19 outbreak? And once it ends, we want to be there ready to provide people. I think people are hungering to be outside, be together. We want to continue to provide those opportunities in a way that's, the problems we faced a month ago are still going to face us when this all ends. How do we make sure that we're ready for that?
Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to expose the audience to a logistical question around polls. Now, didn't you have a poll that was asking folks for ideas that they had for how we should be operating Speak for the Trees in terms of being able to give away those trees in spite of the current situation that we're in? Do you still have that?
Yeah, so that survey is available to you right now if you want. On the bottom of your window, you could complete that survey. So I'm sort of new to this interface, but I think there's a button there that says survey when you hover over it. And then also at the end of this presentation, it will automatically populate your window, I think. So if you wouldn't mind taking that survey either now or later, that would be great. We're also thinking about doing and I wanted to roll this out later, but I'll roll it out now. And let me push it actually right now out to the window. I don't know if that's push, but let's see. Yeah, we're talking about doing a symposium series called Keeping Curious Talking Trees. And we're collaborating with a wonderful group out of BU called Urban, where we want to hold hopefully weekly Zoom sessions where some leading researchers, whether they be graduate students or local academics, will partner with nonprofits or with government entities to sort of have a roundtable. Where do we go next? Or what are the challenges we face? And how can we continue to build community around this? There's a link on our resource. And again, we can send this all out to you later, but there's a link in the little resource window there where you can sign up and we will send you invites. Our first event is going to happen a week from Thursday, and I will be joined by a recently minted PhD and dear friend of ours, Drew, who Atyia, I think you met at a training.
Sure did.
A couple of over at the New England Aquarium.
Over the summer.
And he does a lot of work on tree history or urban forestry history in Boston. So should be a lively conversation. I do want to be mindful that we have two teens who are joining us now.
That's actually what I wanted to pivot to. Before we do, though,
are we ready to introduce them? Yeah.
So before we do that, the survey that David mentioned earlier is in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, just so that if folks were still looking for that. So why don't you go ahead and introduce our wonderful young people who are here to do what you're about to explain to the folks they're about to do.
All right, so Sammi and Jason, you guys there?
Oh, there's Sammi. Hi, Sammi.
Hey.
And
Jason, you're on the phone. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Oh, and where'd she go?
Wow.
Oh, there she is.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Sammi.
Yep, we can hear you.
And what about Jason?
Hello?
There he is. Hello, sir.
Hey, Jason.
Hi.
Welcome, you two. So I'm going to let these two introduce themselves in a minute, but I just want to give everyone a little bit of context. So last year we ran our first Teen Urban Tree Corps program, and we were so grateful to have Sammi and Jason be part of the program. I'll let them talk about who they are and what they learned. But real brief, thank you, the Boston Youth Employment and Engagement Office, for hiring these two amazing teens. Sammi and Jason joined 7 other teens, so we had 9 Boston youth be part of our program. And they learned about trees. They learned how to identify trees. They walked the hot streets of Boston over the summer. They measured over 4,000 trees and 600 empty planting sites. And were just really, really fantastic group of kids. They got to meet all sorts of great people, including our Congresswoman, Ayanna Pressley, Commissioner Ryan Woods from Parks and Rec, some other wonderful environmental leaders and civic leaders. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I can't remember who was going to go first, but I'll let you guys decide.
Okay, so I'm going first. So my name's Sammi, and I worked with the Teen Urban Tree Corps, or TUTSI for short, program last summer. And even though their message is based around trees, like what David has talked about, I've learned so much more than just how to identify a tree. Because yes, now I do know the difference between a cherry tree and a Callery pear. This program goes so far beyond tree identification, because by counting all the trees and empty tree pits over the summer in the city of Boston, we as a program were able to see where more trees could be placed. And we're actually able to tell that information to the city, which means that more trees will be planted in the city, and in the long run means a better environment. And also something I think is really amazing that I would like to point out is the fact that trees can actually reduce the amount you pay on your bills, because trees are actually amazing for insulation, which means they provide shade when it's hot out and also keep in the heat when it's cold out. So people actually end up paying less on their bills because they don't need to turn on their AC or their heater as often. And I know we all want to save a little bit of money on our bills. And going on, trees not only provide shade, but they also prevent flooding and make environments and neighborhoods feel calmer, and help to slow down the rate of global warming and climate change. And as I'm sure we're all aware, our planet is currently not doing the best it has been. But with what others and myself have done at the TUTSI program is a first step in doing something to improve the climate crisis. Because not only are we able to meet amazing people like Commissioner Ryan Woods and Ayanna Pressley, like David previously mentioned, this program was able to bring youth and neighborhoods together to work on an impactful issue. And on the surface, it may just look like we're counting trees on the street. But when you look at the bigger picture, the information we gather will be used to help the city build a more sustainable future for all of us.
Thank you, Sammi.
You're welcome.
So you'll have a chance to ask Sammi questions in a minute, but let's turn to Jason first.
So I'm Jason. I also was a teen who worked with the Teen Urban Tree Corps this summer, and over my summer with Speak for the Trees, I had a great experience. I was able to learn so much about trees and the city of Boston. The Teen Urban Tree Corps was able to inventory around 4,000 trees and find around 800 empty planting sites for trees. I thought that our work greatly helps the city in improving our tree canopy. The tree canopy is also brings me to something that I thought was much more important today in our world, climate change. Our world is getting hotter, and the people up top are not doing nearly enough about it. I feel like as a child, it's hard to really do something about climate change, but there are ways, and Speak for the Trees is one. Knowing how many trees in Boston is great, but knowing where we can potentially plant is even better. Trees help our environment, they clean our air and give us shade, which can lower our climate, like Sammi said. An organization like Speak for the Trees gives youth like me an opportunity to make a difference in my community and on my planet. Although it's not my mess, it's my planet, so I have to help in any way possible. And Speak for the Trees gives me an opportunity to do that.
So can we all just give a virtual round of applause for these two young people? I mean, I think they are phenomenal. Golf claps, right? But they are phenomenal in the work that they've done and how they frame the issues, their understanding, their commitment to roaming the city in helping to actually make the work happen, how articulate they are, and just how amazing they are. So I just want to explicitly call that out so that we're giving them the credit that is due, at least some of the credit that is due. There's way more. But thank you, Sammi. Thank you, Jason. David?
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to not only echo, I got the pleasure of getting to know them a lot this past summer, but the distinct honor to be able to provide them with an opportunity this summer to come back to the Teen Urban Tree Corps program as leaders. And I wanted to just call out John Hancock. We have a wonderful opportunity through the MLK Scholars Program to hire these two and hopefully a couple of more youth that will sort of bridge people coming back, these two who've already been in the program, as bridging this experience between first year and the second year, and providing guidance for the 12 new kids who will come along. I should call them kids, these teenagers, they're young adults, to come along and learn about this. So I'm really looking forward to continuing to have these two work with us and really be leaders, because at the end of the day, the work they do is for their future as much as it is, if not more than it is for ours. So thank you. So I don't know, Olivia, who's sort of in the background there, taking in questions, if there are some questions that people wanted to ask of Sammi and Jason. Sorry, there's a bit of a lag here with the typing, so just give us a minute here to see if there are any questions that pop up. I don't know if the group chat works. So there was one question. Were your friends curious about the work you did, or what did your friends think about your work last summer?
One really really thing that really stood out to me, I remember I mentioned this to David actually. I was telling one of my friends what I did over the summer, and because we were counting trees, my friend refers to David as the tree person, and that's the most thing I just want. Yeah.
This guy's my inspiration right here.
Well, for me, when explaining my job, that when you first explained it, my friends thought it was pretty funny because I was just outside counting trees. But I think when I explained to them that I'm doing more than just counting trees, they started to understand it.
I'm going to read back the question to you, Jason, because I know you can't see it. I don't know if you see it, Sammi, but how has this program influenced how you think about your future?
It's influenced how I think about my future a lot. Also the future of the world, of the planet I'm living on, with climate change and how that's going, and also what I want to do when I grow up. If I wanted to have a job in the forestry. I don't know how it's forestry industry.
I feel it's definitely made me more aware that youth definitely have a bigger role than they think they do, because it's obvious that these big issues are run by people with more power and people in the government. but like this program, I feel like has shown me just like that youth do have a say in their future.
And I think one last question here. What kind of response did you get from people in the neighborhood when you carried out your work? So if someone saw you, for instance, measuring a tree, or if we were having lunch, what kind of responses did you get?
I thought we got a lot of positive responses and a lot of like just curious people wondering what we were doing. And then the people were always very nice, and then they just asked us what we were doing, and we'd always explain it to them, and they always seemed to be very interested in it. If we had like pamphlets that day, we'd give it to them so they could like learn more about Speak for the Trees.
Thank you. And I just wanted to acknowledge the last question that was answered actually came from someone who is an amazing steward of climate change efforts in the city of Boston, and that is Amy Longsworth, who is part of the Green Ribbon Commission for the city of Boston. She does not work for the city of Boston, but they are great partners to the mayor, Mayor Martin J. Walsh, in the work that the city is doing in order to address issues of climate change across a number of issue areas. So I just wanted to acknowledge Amy and say thank you for joining us, and thank you for the question.
Yeah, and there was one last question here. How do you educate other teens about trees? And we're hoping to continue this work by working with teachers. We have our hands full right now, but it would be wonderful to expand this program beyond just a summer program and continue thinking about how we do year-round programming work in the schools. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we're privileged to have in our advisory board. A sustainability director for the schools, Catherine Walsh, who has been very supportive of this. So we're getting there, and we hope to be able to do more work in this area.
So there's one more question that is an easy answer. That's a yes or no question. And so the question was, will Sammi and Jason, will you do it again next year? Or would you do it again next year? Or meeting this summer coming up?
So I do plan on going back if I don't hear from the internship I applied for. I know it's not exactly the answer you wanted.
If David would have me, I'd love to return to Speak for the Trees and the Teen Urban Tree Corps.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, David, I'm going to be quiet for a little while now.
It'd be our honor to have you. Well, thank you, Sammi and Jason. And always nice to see your faces, even if it's virtual. So I want to pivot a little bit here. And so we have time to also have a community discussion towards the end. I want to welcome the man who has really been helping us a lot, Jad Daley, as CEO of American Forests. I think Jad is on the line. Jad, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Certainly can.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So, Jad, you and I have known each other for a long time. I'd say over 2 years, although I don't think we've met in person yet. And you and your organization have been really instrumental in incubating our work and supporting us. I wanted to thank you for that. And I was hoping that you could share a little bit about the role of American Forests generally, and then how you view urban forestry at your organization.
And I'm going to add one more piece to the puzzle, Jad, which is, what are you all thinking in this current time of COVID-19 as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm just really thrilled to be with you on a couple levels. One is that I'm a displaced New Englander. I took one for the team coming down here to Washington, D.C. area to try to do this important work at a national level, but spent most of my adult life in New England and working on issues like urban forestry and forest conservation more broadly in New England. So just have a personal appreciation for the fantastic work being done in Boston and all across New England on these issues. And just excited to see all the momentum. American Forest, if you don't know the organization, is the oldest forest conservation organization in America. We were founded in 1875. We actually predate the U.S. Forest Service by 30 years, if you can believe that. And actually, one of our early accomplishments was bringing together forest leaders across the country to create the U.S. Forest Service. In recognition that we needed stronger centralized leadership on all aspects of forest conservation and management from the federal government. But one of the things that I'm really proud of is that urban forests have been part of American Forest work from the very beginning. I mean, one of our earliest actions in 1882 was planting a tree in Cincinnati, Ohio, with 50,000 people from across the country who came together to declare their support for our forests and to do this ceremonial planting in Cincinnati that long ago. And really ever since, we've always said that the benefits of trees and forests are equally as important, and in some cases even more important, within our cities and towns as they are across rural landscapes, just given the many, many public benefits that we get from every single tree that we have in more urbanized areas. And so one of the things I want to try to do with my remarks tonight, and you've heard some fantastic information about the great work of Speak for the Trees Boston with all these amazing partners, great leadership from the city and other folks in governments across the region, all sorts of different public and private sector partners who are making this happen. And so partly what I want to do is offer a bit of perspective of how this work in Boston connects with and echoes work that's happening across the country. I think really actually echoes the hallmarks of the best work that's being done in urban forestry across the country, but then also maybe offer some perspectives on how I think that the great work being done in Boston now positions this effort for increased resources that are quickly massing really all across from the global and national levels, all the way down to increased investment that's happening there at the local level. And one thing I would note is that I think urban forestry has turned a corner by sharpening its focus. Because it feels like for much of the 100+ years that we've been advancing urban forestry, folks have thought of trees in our cities and towns as a nice thing to have, great scenery, maybe some appreciation of the deeper benefits, but not as life and death infrastructure for our communities. And I think we've really turned a corner on that. This idea of tree equity, of saying we don't just need more trees in our cities and towns, but we need them to be equitably distributed, because they are providing these life and death benefits, especially in a changing climate, protection from extreme heat, improved air quality, other critical services in our communities that are in urgent need at this point. And so we've as an organization, tried to sharpen the messaging around tree equity for climate action, for climate justice, for health equity, and then as we heard described earlier by these two inspiring young people, as a way to create the green careers of the future, and particularly green careers that can provide opportunities for folks from underserved communities who most urgently need that economic opportunity and uplift. And so by really sharpening the focus around what are we accomplishing by making this increased investment in urban forestry, I think we've kind of lit a fire under this urban forest movement nationally, and now created an opportunity to really supercharge the resources that are going into efforts like the work there locally in Boston. And so I want to call out a couple of those opportunities. One is that there's a new Trillion Trees movement globally that you might have heard about, and in particular that was announced at the World Economic Forum in Davos this winter, and a new global initiative called OneSea.org, which is seeking to foster the planting and regeneration of 1 trillion trees globally. And very importantly, that's called out urban forestry as one of its top goals. And so that's turned into a huge rallying cry for governments and for corporations and other actors who are kind of taking it as a call to action to step up their investment in this work. And in fact, our organization has been partnering with the World Economic Forum and some of the big actors in that Trillion Trees effort to create a new U.S. chapter of OneSea.org to make sure that we're channeling all that energy into the outstanding work being done here in the United States, like the work on urban forestry here in Boston. So that's just really a tailwind that's coming behind the type of work that you've been hearing about tonight from the global and national level. And one of the things that we've seen across the country is as those new resources and energies are generated, they are looking for very sophisticated urban forest partnerships, just like you've heard tonight. We have worked with our partners around the country to create a particular change model. We call it our community relief change model, that's based on now having worked in cities all across the country, what we consider to be the indispensable ingredients for not just doing good projects, but for actually building an urban forest movement that can scale in the city of Boston and across greater Boston and across cities and metro areas across America. And, you know, some of those most key elements are you can't just be from city leadership, and it can't just come from community-based organizations or from, you know, other actors in the private sector. You have to have this particular constellation of different types of public and private sector actors all working together in a concerted, dedicated partnership, each entity playing its particular role in building capacity in a region to really drive this work. And so that's one of the reasons why we were so excited to collaborate with Speak for the Trees Boston in helping to incubate this organization. Is we looked at the situation in the city of Boston and greater Boston and said, but all of the ingredients are there. But there's this one kind of critical component that we've seen as indispensable in other regions around the country of a local community-based organization that can be just singularly focused on advancing this urban forest agenda in partnership with all these other entities. And I think the kinds of things that you've heard about tonight show the power of having that kind of keystone piece in this mix. We've also found absolutely indispensable to have the right planning and science in place. So this data collection that you heard about earlier, it means that we're not just, you know, planting more trees or doing tree maintenance where it's convenient, but we're being really science-driven and fully strategic in how we're investing these resources that we're challenging ourselves to scale up to do this more. And that includes being very strategic around variables like tree equity. Are we putting the trees in the communities that are most underserved in terms of tree cover, and where that lack of tree cover is exacerbating other inequities like health inequities, like greater vulnerability to extreme heat in the face of climate change and things of that nature. So the sorts of science-based approaches that you've heard here tonight are exactly what's necessary. And then to drive that work through projects in deep partnership with communities. If there's one critical success factor we've seen again and again, these efforts can't land like a spaceship in the communities where they're taking place. They need to be executed and through a deep community engagement that creates a role for everyone and ultimately empowers communities to be not just part of doing the work, but to be stewards going forward of the tree canopy that we're creating in cities for the future. And I think the approach that's being taken here in Boston with great contributions from Speak for the Trees is absolutely the right way to do it. And boy, something like what we heard earlier, this type of youth engagement and workforce development is such a powerful way to show that this is an effort about trees, but it's really an effort about people. It's about how can we use trees to serve the needs of people in an area like Boston, and how do we make that work as deeply connected to those people and an understanding of their needs and all the ways we can leverage more tree cover in cities to create every type of opportunity, from improved public health to additional economic opportunities. So I think this just has so many of the hallmarks that we've seen again and again that are the right way to do it. And when you do it the right way, there are right now unprecedented resources that are ready to come to the table and scale up this work in really exciting ways. So I want to close with 3 quick thoughts and examples of where we see that opportunity in terms of new resources to infuse into a fantastic effort like this one. One is from the federal level. We have managed now for 2 years running to get the first increases in the urban and community forestry program budget and U.S. Forest Service in a very, very long time. And in fact, we now have legislators working on multiple pieces of new legislation to scale up urban forest resources, in some cases doubling, tripling, or even in the most ambitious legislation, 100 or 1,000-fold what we've ever seen in terms of investment in urban forestry. Some bills actually proposing billions of dollars of investment in urban forestry to capture the full opportunity here for tree equity, for climate action and climate justice, and much more. So I think it's a very safe bet to say that we already have more resources coming from the federal level, but they will scale up quite dramatically, we believe, in the fairly near future. And they're going to flow to efforts like this that have been organized the right way and can show that those resources are going to be invested in high impact activities. The second thing to say is at the state level, Massachusetts has been doing fantastic work in this area. Has been developing a lot of new funding and resources to advance natural climate change solutions. And I would suggest that we have a great model just right across the border in Rhode Island of how some of those enhanced resources can be deployed into an effort like this one. We've been working with the state of Rhode Island now for about a year and a half on a new statewide initiative to scale up urban forest resources, tie it to very, very granular and specific data-driven planning, and then to feed it into a community practice that in that case is taking place right now in every city in the state, and to empower all of those actors with deep scientific guidance around climate change and health parameters of urban forestry and how to maximize our investment for those outcomes. And this work here in Boston is really perfectly positioned for that kind of version 2.0 level of investment that we've seen states like Massachusetts and Rhode Island that are really motivated on these issues are really positioned to help make that happen. And then lastly, on the corporate side, one of the things that I mentioned earlier that's been exciting from this new global interest in the Trillion Trees movement is that it has inspired, in many cases, U.S.-based corporations, but that work internationally, to think about investing in urban forests and other forest activities at an entirely different scale. And so I can say that we're in discussions now with all sorts of really interesting partners and are aware of many other discussions that could lead to some really significant new investments from corporate partners, even on top of some of the great corporate support for this work that you've already heard about here tonight. Again, those resources from the corporate sector are looking for work that is science-driven, rooted in community, has all the right partners at the table, and is built to last. That's built to create a true movement that can achieve outcomes at scale. So in closing, from our perspective, this is the right work. It's being done the right way, and we think that the wind is really at our back for taking this work in Boston and Greater Boston to a whole new scale.
Thank you so much, Jad. And I just wanted to call out the great support, again, that American Forest has shown and the commitment you've shown not merely to speak for the trees, but to urban forestry in general. I've seen in our short time working with you, really the messaging, the commitment to this, your framing again around tree equity, the diversity I see in your employees and in your programs. It's really not only put wind in our sails, but has really actually allowed us to lean heavily on some language that's really powerful. So appreciative of the connections you provided and the resources you provided.
Jad, do you have time for a question?
Sure.
So one of the participants asked, does American Forest conduct business partner outreach or mostly rely on company sponsors making first contact?
That's a great question. It's a little bit of both, but I would say for us it's probably more often that folks are finding us. This is, you can imagine, there's such a broad universe, of potential partners out there, and so we do get a tremendous amount of incoming inquiries. But with that said, we also work hard to make connections both through research and in identifying companies that share the kinds of goals that I've described today, as well as engaging in a lot of events where corporate partners and organizations like ours tend to find each other. Events like Green Biz and other sustainable brands and other similar events that create really ideal opportunities for different partners to find each other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And then one other piece, not for you in particular, Jad, but there was a question that was asked that has already been answered. But I think it speaks to the work of Speak for the Trees in partnership with communities. And the person who asked the question, we should also acknowledge that person. So the question really was about, some of the advocacy work in communities to save trees on two specific streets in the community. And so the question was answered by the amazing Olivia, who we have not explicitly acknowledged. And I want to acknowledge Olivia. She is the wonderful person who is answering all of your questions that you're posting in the Q&A box like a pro. So thank you, Olivia. It's like she's been doing it forever. So the question was answered, but I think it speaks to the partnership of Speak for the Trees with communities and staying informed about what's happening in communities, but also advocating. And even in spite of potentially not winning the battle through advocacy, having contingency plans for being able to say, well, we'll just plant some more trees. So I just wanted to acknowledge the question. And the person who asked the question is Nancy Smith, who works at the Boston Public Health Commission, our local public health department here in the city of Boston. And she specifically works in the Office of Public Health Preparedness for the city of Boston. And I think it's important to acknowledge her explicitly because that office is basically at ground zero for the coordinating across healthcare infrastructure right now while we're trying to deal with COVID-19 in the city of Boston. So I want to acknowledge her, say thank you, and all of the work that she does around community engagement, community resilience building, and developing the relationships necessary to make that work well. So thank you, Nancy Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. You've been doing an amazing job the past couple of weeks, and thank you for taking time. To answer your question, to echo what Atyia said, I think there are a couple of things that we're learning as a new organization. And again, we've only been around for about 2 years. But specific to your question around Melnia Cass Boulevard and some other places in American Legion Highway and other places in Boston where mature trees are being removed, there's a history that we're learning about as a new organization, trying to figure out how old are some of these projects, what's been the community engagement process, what are the places where we can learn more or apply pressure or sort of reposition how trees are talked about or discussed. I think what we're facing in Boston is a huge development boom in the city that is driven by a very healthy economy and lots of people wanting to move into the city, but also being mindful that there's a lot of competing, that brings in a lot of competition for all sorts of space. And one of the things that's being squeezed out is trees. So how do we continue to advocate for trees while also mindful that sometimes we need to think about smart development and what does smart development look like in ways that can still provide affordable housing for residents, that can still allow people to stay in their communities, that can still allow for smart development. So there's challenges in this work. I think there needs to be a continued conversation about what we're losing and what we're gaining with development, and what the role is of making sure that the Boston we build today is going to be healthy and livable in 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And one thing that Jad did mention before we wrap up is the disparate or inequitable impact of heat in communities, and the power of trees and helping with that. And if folks are really interested in understanding how nuanced and deep those impacts can be, there's a great book by Eric Kleinenberg called Heat Wave that talks about the Chicago heat wave of 1995. And it's before he wrote the book, and before actually prior to the book, he wrote a number of journal articles that a bunch of nerds read, but none of us regular people had access to. When he wrote his book, though, is really when it uncovered a lot of the dynamics that unless you do the kind of social autopsy that he conducted, you don't really get to understand those nuances and details, and how communities are impacted and impacted differently, and how that sits on top of a larger historical narrative as well as continued behaviors that reinforce those inequities. So David, as we wrap up.
So we're wrapping up here, and I wanted to thank everyone for dropping in. We have a couple of minutes. I don't know if there's a group chat feature. I tried to activate it, but if it doesn't work, my apologies.
It is activated.
But you can always ping us at Q&A and we can push questions. Happy to, take any suggestions if you're ready to leave. Take the survey if you could before you leave. And I just wanted again to share with you our first, hopefully of many, a series symposium, Keeping Curious, Talking Trees. Our first one will be next Thursday, April 2nd in the afternoon. I don't have the time in front of me. I think it's 2 p.m. If not, maybe it's 3 p.m. And I wanted to thank Jad for dropping by. So we have another question coming here. And the question is, do all tree planting orgs basically consider themselves part of a fellowship, like outsourcing planting when logistics of a donation don't match their capabilities? Interesting question. And I don't know if Jad's still online. You could take a stab at that. I mean, I think there's definitely best practices that we're learning from and partnering with other organizations.
Yeah, thanks. I think it is a community, an ecosystem of sorts among the groups doing this work at different scales, and whether it's the complementarity between national organizations like ours and local organizations like Speak for the Trees, or in some cases, sort of lateral relationships among groups working at the same scale, but that in some cases are going to have complementary skills and resources. We do see that kind of creative collaboration all across the country as folks are just trying to get the work done and figuring out who's best positioned to advance it at a particular time. And so I think that's actually an interesting point of discussion as this work moves forward. I think in each of the places where we've been involved in a long-term partnership. I think of a city like Detroit, for example, and Miami-Dade County as another, where places that have set huge ambitions and started out with a particular cadre of partners. Kind of everyone had certain defined roles, but it evolves over time. And in some cases, new partners come in to fill gaps that emerge. And so I think that will be an interesting piece of this work going forward as it scales up, is to figure out how all those pieces fit together, and are there new kinds of coordination and collaboration along the lines of what you're describing that might be helpful.
Mm-hmm. And
I just want to echo that even more deeply. Oh, go ahead, Atyia. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. I was just checking in because we do have a question. And I think it's an important question as we wrap up the night, which is, how should this group of tree advocates stay in touch? And that question comes from Nat Taylor. Thank you, Nat.
So Nat is a member of a brand new organization called Tree Eastie, and I want to celebrate the work that they've been undertaking in a few short months. And I'm thinking here, when I started this work, that I was sort of going off on a limb and doing something a little bit zany, but I've actually found that this really speaks to people. And I really think that in some level, the trees are speaking back to us and encouraging us to get together and to care for them, because they're going to care for us. And I think it really is a moment for us to gather around and celebrate trees and celebrate each other. Like Jad said, we need to think about trees as trees, but also more profoundly about the way that they serve the needs of people. So Nat has been really wonderful in helping gather community. And I think there are a couple of ways for us to stay in touch. I think one way, I encourage you all to sign up for our newsletter. I encourage you all to join us at future events where we'll be able to talk about these issues and continue the conversation. And I encourage you to reach out to us and invite us to your communities. So echoing the last question as well, the work we couldn't do our work without the support of not only everyday people, but also community organizations that know the residents in their community, that work with them, that understand the politics and the relationships, and have that sense of bringing people together, who've done that work to help us get the trees out there. So it's not about us. We don't see ourselves as being that organization that parachutes in and delivers trees to your door and walks away. We really work by finding people who are already committed to this, who are thinking about this, and providing them with resources, whether it be literature, education, trees, advocacy tools, to build that capacity at the community level. So I want to continue this conversation in future symposia. We had one a couple of years ago, our tree roundtable. I hope we can continue to invite more groups into that. Maybe have a day-long retreat of some sort in the future, where we can all gather together and really strategize around this, come up with a plan, a community plan, a plan that connects with the city's ambitious goals of continuing to grow its urban forest and making sure that it can meet the needs of Boston in the future. A hotter and wetter Boston, as I think we're going to have more rain, but we're also going to have less rain. We're going to have hotter summers, but wetter springs. So how do we deal with that? And what are some of the solutions that trees can provide? So I hope we can find novel ways. And I think in the coming months or coming weeks, they'll have to be very, very novel and remote. But hopefully in a couple of months, when COVID-19 disappears and allows us to return back to a new normal, we need to find ways to continue this conversation, to meet people in their neighborhoods, and to continue talking about the work.
Thank you, David. It has been a pleasure to co-host with you and to participate in such an amazing organization. We are officially 2 minutes over. And so thank you for everyone for staying on the line as we used a couple of extra minutes. We appreciate you, and we'll be following up with folks with more information. Please make sure you donate. We need to make sure we could put our money where our mouth is. And hopefully we will be able to get some more information out about how we stay connected to one another, especially during this time where it feels like we're so disconnected. So thank you.
Yes. And thank you, Atyia. So wonderful, a friendship that we've developed over a couple of years, like you said, and it's really so meaningful to have you here on board with us. And Jad, thank you for dropping in. Thank you, Jason and Sammi. This webcast is recorded, so we'll be able to share it in a couple of hours, and you can share it with your friends. And we really appreciate everyone dropping by.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks.
Stay safe. Good night.
Are we good? Are we officially off the air? It looks like we're still live.
I think we're still live. 1 minute.